Hi everyone. I am Maryam. I'm an architect and an architectural historian, and today I will talk a little bit about the arrival of late modernism in Dubai between the 1960s and the 1970s. I realized today that I actually did not define modernism because I assumed I'm talking to architects, and so I did include a few slides just to introduce the topic, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. So today the talk will be basically an introduction first about modernism as a 20th century movement, and also it will discuss the principles of international modernism. I will move on from that to how Dubai came to become modern, and in that there's a twofold answer. There is one focusing on Sheikh Rashids' vision for Dubai, and also John Harris's master plans for the city. And in it, the application of modernism will be discussed through a selection of case studies, both urban and architectural, and I will end with some of my thoughts and recommendations because this is an ongoing research. So, the aim of this research basically is to study the modern buildings that emerged in Dubai in the 60s and 70s. It allows for a better understanding of how these modernist architectural manifestations evolved in that shifting period and how it helped shape the urban fabric of the actual emirate. So it is done again in light of Sheikh Rashids' vision of increasing or enhancing the standards of living in Dubai for the people and wanting to make Dubai an international city. It's also important to note that John Harris had two master plans that we will discuss later on, and how that also helped in bringing modernism to light. Through these examples and through this research, basically my aim is to highlight modern heritage and to classify it and preserve it not only as part of the heritage of Dubai, but also of the wider Emirates, of the wider UAE. So a little bit about modernism. Modernism as a global architectural and design movement emerged in the first decades of the 20th century, and it basically emerged, or mainly it was mainly focused in the 1920s and 1950s, but it also has origins that go back to the Enlightenment period as well as to the expansions to high tech that followed the Industrial Revolution. This is why it's also common to divide modernism into three phases: early, modern, and late. In this research, I would focus more on late modernism because that is where the principles, or the more common principles were applied here in the architecture of Dubai. Again, very famous architects and leaders of this movement, Corbusier, Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, Philip Johnson, Louis Sullivan, who basically coined form follows function, and basically there was also Adolf Loos, who basically published an essay about modernism where he said ornament is a crime. So you'll see that one of the main things in this movement is a lack of ornamentation, because it is rejecting these kind of traditional historical ways of building and adapting more of a minimalistic approach in design. Also, the movement was influenced by other movements that happened in art, for example, such as Futurism, Constructivism, Die Stil, which is style, German, and Bauhaus. So I just wanted to highlight some principles of international modernism for people. If you're not familiar with, you can, with these principles, visually also link certain things. So again, lack of ornament is one. There is an emphasis on very generic forms, so very rectangular, horizontal, vertical lines. There's almost this movement towards low horizontal massing. There are modern materials being used, so you have a lot of concrete buildings that come out. There are traditional building materials that are being used, but in new ways. There's also an emphasis on honesty of materials, so you let the material speak for itself. There's also a huge connection between interior spaces and their surrounding sites. The plans are very open, they're free-flowing. There's a huge also focus on the relationship of the building to the sun, so you find a lot of sun shading and human comfort becoming the essence of that. Very whitewashed spaces, asymmetrical, and there's obviously a generous use of glass and natural light. These are some examples from different times that follow basically different principles of the modern movement. And now we talk about becoming a modern Dubai. This is actually one of my favorite quotes about architecture, which is that it is a subject that demands to be understood in context. But what is context? Context is a context of its production, so society, economics, politics, culture, and also the context of its consumption, representation, and interpretation. And I think this is really important for us to understand this kind of context, production and consumption, to understand how modern Dubai came to happen. I just wanted to also highlight some of the events just to put in context what was happening in Dubai at that time. So in the early 1960s onwards, fresh sources of water were actually located in Dubai, and there was an Austrian company that was brought in to create a distribution plant. The dredging of the creek happened to allow bigger vessels to enter, enhancing Dubai's standing as a trading port. The first official newspaper was actually established, and it was called the Dubai Gazette, 1961. And the Dubai Municipality Council was actually formed in the early 60s, and that meant that we finally had planning, health, safety, and environmental regulations in the city. And in those archives, you can also find the first regulations for cinema tickets, even for the selling of alcohol. Like, all of that happened because we had a council. The 1960 first master plan of Dubai ever by John Harris was being implemented. Excavations for oil started, and it was founded in 1966. The government was investing in infrastructure work, so there were roads, connecting bridges, etc. coming up. And the new projects were commissioned, projects such as firefighting stations, public libraries, service stations, street lighting, etc. And of course, with the decline of the pearl trade, other professions emerged, and the electrification of the city of Dubai began. Dubai, we have to be honest, is considered historically young when we compare to Euro-American cities, although it has been, or it has a long-standing history for its importance as an important geographical location for trade and for political administration between Britain and the sub-Indian continent. And the cities want to become an economic center and a tourist destination began way before what people think is today. Like, Dubai becoming modern, or Dubai wanting to become an international city in the 60s, is actually what laid the foundation for Dubai to become a global city today. Dubai didn't become a global city overnight. It actually had the foundation of becoming an international city to begin with. So that's an important note. Also, before the 1960s, most settlements in Dubai actually revolved around the Dubai Creek. And then when basically movement started to happen and people shifted outside the creek and moved to other areas, these housing districts started emerging, buildings started emerging, apartment typologies, etc. And that created also a space for the modern language to kind of formulate. Again, what I'm saying is, this is the foresight. Like, this happened to allow Dubai to grow and to enhance its future. The modernism as an aesthetic movement came in the 1960s to Dubai. Now, I'm focusing today only on Dubai, but modernism as a movement came to the region way before that. It came to Kuwait, it came to Bahrain, to Oman, and even in Sharjah, certain things started before Dubai because the political agent was actually in Sharjah, not in Dubai. But I will focus on the 1960s because that is when it happened in Dubai, and this is my area of research. These manifestations were very detail-oriented, and they were very sensitive to the site in which they were situated. So They were responding to the needs of the end user. They were responding, whether the end user was Emirati or not, these buildings responded to their needs and to the context in which they were practiced. They were very conscious in their designs, just like the wind tower houses were conscious in their designs for that time, for that period. These were also conscious in their overall design propositions. Now, to understand architecture in Dubai in relation to the international modern movement, I always reflect on two questions. First, why was modernism introduced in Dubai? And second, how was it applied? When we want to look at why, there are two influential forces. One is local and one is foreign. Then on the local front is Sheikh Rashid. Sheikh Rashid has an ambitious vision for Dubai to become a futuristic city, to become an international city. I sat with people who told me stories about him waking up at 5 a.m., going in the middle of Jabal Ali, standing on a hill and actually telling them, this is where I'll build a port. And they're like, you're crazy, nobody's gonna come here. We have a port on the creek and nobody comes, it's only 2 boats. And he's like, it's okay, I'm not building it for these boats, I'm building it for the boats of our children. And today Jabal Ali port is actually one of the biggest in the world. So he had that ambitious vision. So this is on the local front. On the foreign front, there was a heavy presence, of course, of British forces in this region, which actually helped bring modernization and modernity to the region, and it also brought in a lot of foreign architects to practice here. A lot of people see this as a negative thing, but I see it as a positive thing when compared to foreign architects practicing today. A lot of people say, oh, you know, foreign architects are not sensitive, you need to use local architects. But these foreign architects lived here. These are people who actually got a house on the creek and lived here. They lived in Jumeirah, they grew up here, they spoke the language. These are people who understood the context. They're not an architect now who's sitting in an office in the States sending a rendering for a project here in Dubai without ever coming. So these architects were more site sensitive than any other architects of any period, in my opinion, that practiced in Dubai. And the how will be demonstrated through the selection of case studies. So Sheikh Rashid is commonly referred to as Bani Dubai, the builder of Dubai. He's also known to be the father of modernity in Dubai. And he was very smart. He surrounded himself with a group of advisors, local and foreign, and he would always not do discussions in groups, but he would also take individuals one-on-one and ask them, so what do you think of this project? What do you think the people need? What do you think your children's children will need? So he was very involved in the people, and his idea and his vision wasn't just to make Dubai international and forget about the person. It was very human oriented. It was very, you're a citizen of the emirate, I want to make your life better. So this also, the focus again on the international style as a style of modernism here in Dubai, I think also it is because they wanted to become international. So what is the best way to become international is to bring an international language of design. Something, these buildings that could be universal and appropriate for all cultures, for all people. So it's more inviting. This almost drastic stylistic evolution from Arish, from mud brick, coral stone to completely modernist structures shows you the polar shift from tradition to modernism, not only as a way of building, but also as a mode of life. So even the way people lived and started living when these structures emerged started changing. This is actually one of my favorite images ever. This is Sheikh Rashid, Sheikh Mohammed next to him, and they're on top of the Empire State Building in New York. And I like this because he had the vision and ambition. He used to visit these international cities and go like, you know what, I'll come back and make Dubai look like that. So if you see the background of this picture, it's a concrete jungle. If you see the background of Dubai in that time, it was sand, but he had the vision to see it. He had the vision to make that happen. And actually a funny story here is when he was standing on the Empire State Building, he found out they were building the World Trade Center in New York, and he said, you know what, I want one in Dubai. And ours was completed before that, before the one in New York. So again, here I just wanted to list some projects in a chronological order, just for you guys to also understand what was happening in the time. So the first airport in 1959, then there was the municipal council, regulations came out, Al Maktoum Bridge was opened to traffic in 1963, there was a roundabout made with the clock tower, which we'll discuss later on. Foreign international brands started here, so Jashan Mall, which was based in Bahrain, opened actually in Bania Square, which was the first proper shop we had that sold like international brands, and people would actually come from Oman and everywhere just to shop there because it became like that branch you go to, like the main one. And the creek was dredged, the oil was found, and Emirates Airlines was actually launched in 1985. So you can tell from the kind of projects, the scale and the scope of these projects, that it wasn't just a response to the immediate needs of the people, it actually was laying the foundation for Dubai and its future development. John Harris. So John Harris is a British architect and planner, very young, and he basically completed the first master plan ever of Dubai in 1960, and he did the entire master plan based only on aerial surveys and photographs of existing settlements. He basically, what he did was he took the existing historic, like the center of the city, and he just extended lines out in the desert, creating road maps, because he had nothing else to work with. It was just sand beyond that. And later, when oil was found in 1966, he started updating the plan. In 1971, a newer plan was issued, focusing on zoning and different changes. These master plans mark a turning point in the architectural language and urban design of Dubai, where traditional practices become altered and at times completely abandoned, allowing for modernism to manifest itself in the newly constructed buildings, landmarks, parks, and neighborhoods, most of which were designed by Japanese architects, British, European, and some Arab architects and engineers that were educated abroad. Examples of these people who practice here include Sir William Halcrow, John Harris, Peter Jackson, Otto Bollard, Jafar Tuqan, Edgar Bublik, and Zeki Hamsi, amongst others. So this is the first plan that John Harris did for Dubai that dates back to the 1960s. So you can see that there is a huge concentration around the creek, which is where all the settlements happened. And then basically the idea was to extend out these lines and start creating neighborhoods and to create basically districts within the city. This is the 1971, so this is the updated version, and you can see the difference here is that with the discovery of oil, the city started to become zoned. You actually needed to zone cities into commercial areas, residential, industrial, etc. Funny story before I reach there. Actually, John Harris was going to leave Dubai, and someone went to the airport to tell him Sheikh Rashid wants you to come back and do the master plan of Dubai. And he said, well, I'm in the airport, I'm about to board the plane, but they said Sheikh Rashid is waiting for you. So he said, I went one way and my suitcase went the other way. So yeah. So here we focus on my favorite part, which are the actual case studies of Dubai. So I like to talk a little bit just about the spatial matrix of my study, which is old and new Dubai. So usually when we use old and new, they have their own set of connotations as words, and usually people would assume that new means successor to or inferior to the old. But in Dubai there is an interesting case because they actually are synchronically existing with one another. So it's very interesting that what is considered old is still considered new. So the Trade Center was considered a new building at the time, but now it's an old building in New Dubai. So the concept also of what is new and what is old in Dubai is ever changing. And it is interesting to see that because most of the buildings I look at in today's context are not considered iconic, yet in this spatial matrix they make a huge difference. I have a selection of case studies. I have, I think, around 185 buildings. I'm not going to show all of those today, but I will showcase some of them. But some of the buildings I focus on are mostly public use buildings and the different typologies. So educational, governmental, religious, recreational, cultural, commercial, and the main areas and districts of research include Deira, Baradbay, Satwa, Karama, Abu Hail, Hor al-And, the Creek waterfront, Al-Rigga, so areas like that if you're familiar with them. And then I have my own criteria for selecting these buildings, so I have my own list of why a building should be important. So the list or the reasons differ from one building to another. So it might be that these buildings are works of very famous architects, so we need to highlight them, we need to talk about them. Or it could be a building with social, cultural, political, or educational values, such as schools, hospitals, etc. There are buildings that are maybe not architecturally significant, but they are still they're considered the first of their type. So say the first hotel, the first bank, the first hospital. So there's that. And then of course there are buildings that are significant in shaping the urban fabric of the city. So for example, I think a lot of you guys are familiar with the Toyota building. The Toyota building architecturally I don't think is significant at all. I don't think it's a beautiful building. It's a normal building. But it's the one like just on the bridge going down towards Al-Wasl. It has the huge Toyota logo on it. Yeah, so that is actually being demolished soon, sadly. So I don't think it's significant as a building, but I think it's significant in how it shaped the urban fabric around it. A lot of buildings came to happen because that was there. So it's buildings like that, and of course also buildings that are aesthetically pleasing in terms of architecture. They have certain architectural elements that make them stand out. Buildings that are initial prototypes. So a lot of clinics were made as prototypes in Dubai and they were repeated. So maybe we don't need to save all prototypes, but we can save one. Same thing with schools. Like schools were made as prototypes, so maybe we don't need to save all, but one is good. Buildings that are still functional as originally intended. So the trade center is still functional as originally intended. And then of course there are buildings that house governmental services, so they have an actual political value. And buildings that are considered iconic. So we start with my favorite building in all of Dubai. This is actually a house in Deira from 1961. And it's beautiful. It's this 3-story residential building. It's surrounded by high-rise developments, yet it's just there like a small corner villa. And it has this beautiful long shaft that has 1961 written under it. And there's a rumor that it used to be a theater, but that has not been confirmed yet. And you can see the details also in that it was the early 60s, so it's not completely modernist. There's still like some sort of an Art Nouveau thing going on with the doors and the stairs. So it still was trying to formulate a language of its own. And this is the house from outside, as you can see it. And the owner actually still lives there. And it's just a beautiful house. I think it's just beautiful. The Dubai Zoo of 1967. So the Dubai Zoo was designed by Otto Bullard. Actually, the reason Otto Bullard was commissioned to design the zoo was because he had his own collection of wild animals that he kept. And Sheikh Rashid got so many complaints that he was housing these wild animals, he needs to take care of them. So he said, listen, I'll give you a piece of land, just put all the animals there, make a zoo, let people come, enjoy them, and you're good to go. So that's how he actually was commissioned to design the zoo. And when they gave him the plot of land, it was in Jumeirah 1, which now has been evacuated, but when it was in Jumeirah 1, they actually told him, yeah, it's so far away from the people, just put the wild animals there. And today, it's literally the first stop on Jumeirah Road. So it just gives you an idea of how that is.
Any plans now?
Sorry?
Any plans for it after?
I am fighting for it, but the land is too valuable. Exactly. I mean, for me, if they want to remove the part that housed the animals, I understand, because also there's hygiene and safety problems. But there's this beautiful residential part that they built for it, and there's a huge beautiful garden opposite to it. So if they can just at least preserve the residential building block, I think it would be worth it. Considering also that this zoo was actually the first and in the whole Arabian Peninsula, so it has a significance not only on the scale of Dubai, but also on the scale of the entire region. Union House. I like this photo. I actually got it from the archives of William Duff, who happens to be the financial advisor of Sheikh Rashid, and it's just so pretty to see it like that. And I thought of showing it today because it's one of those buildings that has governmental and political value, because this is where the declaration was signed in 1971, and today it's part of the Ittihad Museum. The Dubai airport of 1971. I know there was a first initial airport in 1959, and we have our airport now, but in my opinion this is the best airport we ever had, so I had to show it. And you can see that its design was really advanced according to that time. I mean, it looks like airports you would find today, like in today's design, so it was really interesting. And before that, before the discovery of oil, we actually only got, I think, one airline, Middle Eastern Airlines from Lebanon, and there was one flight a week only. And today, Dubai Airport is one of the busiest in the world. And one of the interesting things about this airport is the road connecting to the airport is actually a flyover road, and that was the first one ever to be made in Dubai. This is the Zabeel High School for Girls. This school actually I've written about, I've campaigned for since 2012, and we still have not reached a conclusion on whether we can save it or not. Basically, I think this is a great building. It has a lot of the surfaces have memories of students. They have fingerprints, they have coats, they have memories. And it's a structurally sound building, but they evacuated it in 2010 because it's no longer standing. It's a completely fine building. There is nothing wrong with it, but the land is too valuable. And you can see the school. It has two huge courtyards, and it is designed in an inverse U shape, so it also gives privacy for the girls in the school to practice sports, to take off their covers if they want to. So even the design as a prototype was very sensitive to the school and to the girls going to that school. Al-Ittihad Private School, 1976. I don't know if anyone here has been to Ittihad School or is a student of Ittihad School. Yeah, I studied there as well. That's why I had to put it. So for me, this was a nice surprise because I actually studied in Ittihad School, and I think we were among the last batches that studied in this building, which used to be the KG building. And now it's just a storage and nursery, and the school expanded. But the interesting part that I never knew was John Harris actually designed the school, the old part of it. And when I was there and I found that out, it felt like I found my purpose in life. Like I studied there and now I'm studying him. So no, it's not demolished. It's still there, but it's completely in a bad condition, and it's storage and a nursery. Like it's really bad now. And actually, this was the first private school in Dubai, and it was inaugurated by Sheikh Rashid. The Trade Center, of course, like we can't talk about modernism and not talk about the most iconic building we have. There are so many stories about the Trade Center, but a lot of stories people would say when they drive from Abu Dhabi or somewhere coming to Dubai, they know they reach Dubai when they see the Trade Center. And now we know we reach Dubai when the speed changes on Sheikh Zayed. But like back in the day, it was the Trade Center. And in the beginning, actually, this whole tower was in gray, but Sheikh Rashid didn't like it, so he said paint it in white, which I think was a good decision. The Trade Center was 40 stories high, making it actually the tallest skyscraper in the region for 20 years. And actually it was inaugurated by Queen Elizabeth herself in 1979. A funny story is, if you know the Trade Center, you'll know that there are the 5 buildings next to it that soon will be demolished. If you see the 5 buildings on Sheikh Zayed Road, you'll see that the last one is actually a bit shorter than the rest, like it's not as high. And the story is that Sheikh Rashid kept going to site, and whenever he'd go to site, he'd tell them, oh, you know, change this and do that and change this and do that. And the concept of variation was not very common back in the day. So the contractor came back and said, you know, well, this is going to cost you this much more. And he said, why? They said, because you kept changing the building. He said, you know what, I will not pay more. The last one, just stop it as where it is. So that's why the last one is actually shorter than the rest. Again, the trade center. Maybe I need to say one thing is also, as Dubai Municipality, we are working towards the classification and preservation of modern heritage, and this is one of the buildings that actually we are almost successfully classifying. So yeah. The Hyatt Regency, basically this was built for Abdul Wahab Galadari, and if you were from my generation, a lot of you guys went ice skating there. So it was one of the first hotels that we had in Dubai, and the picture on top is actually Sheikh Rashid in a crane going up to overlook the construction of the hotel. Melia Plaza is the first, actually not the first shopping mall. The first shopping mall technically is the one that has Megroodi's on Jumeirah Road, because that's from 1975. Although it only had that bookstore, it's still considered the first shopping mall in Dubai. But this is more of what we understand malls to be. This is one of the earlier examples. Before Al Ghareer, everyone says Al Ghareer was first, but this is earlier. And the interesting thing about Melia Plaza, which I think a lot of people don't know, is in that area that those buildings, it's like a L shape, and that area is actually a tennis court. So you have a suspended tennis court there, which is really cool. Al Melia Contracting, also who Al Melia Plaza is for, did a lot of the projects that happened in that time, so they constructed a lot of these buildings. Al Amal Hospital. Al Amal Hospital is from 1983, also designed by John Harris, sadly demolished because it is right behind City Walk, and you know, we need more City Walk because that's what we don't have enough of in Dubai. So I love this building. I think it is so site sensitive. He basically designed it in a way where all the patient rooms were looking inwards to these sand-filled courtyards, and this interiorized kind of design made the patients feel at home. So it mimicked the design of a traditional home. So it was very site sensitive. It was the first hospital to actually address mental health, and I think it's just beautiful. You can see this picture as well, and there was an event arranged to basically say goodbye to the hospital that had pictures and memories of all the patients that were in that hospital adorned all over, but it didn't stop it from being demolished. Quickly, I just wanted to show some pictures of other buildings without going too much into detail. Al Nasr Cinema, the Casio building, the British Petroleum building just opposite City Walk, the Ittisalat building by Arthur Erickson, Sheraton Hotel, and what I think is the most beautiful petrol pump station in Dubai, the last one. Now we talk about urban monuments and landmarks. I did not put a lot of examples here. I will only focus on some key monuments and landmarks that helped shape the fabric of the city. So of course, the first one we start with is the clock tower. So the clock tower was designed by Otto Bollard, the same architect who did the zoo, but he didn't finish it. It was finished by Ziki Hamsi, and the clock was an Omega clock, and today it is still an Omega clock, but it has been replaced ever since, and it was a gift to Sheikh Rashid from his son-in-law. And the bridge was, the roundabout was actually commissioned to connect the airport road to the Maktoum bridge that recently opened. Al Safa Park, which is considered one of the first parks in Dubai, sadly now almost 70% is demolished because of the water canal project. Although if they kept it, I think it would have increased land value, because if you compare it to cities like New York and London, the most expensive properties are the ones overlooking Hyde Park or Central Park. So you could have done your project and increased value without actually demolishing this park. One information, because I have OCD. Al Safa Park is not the oldest park in Dubai. The oldest park in Dubai is actually Al Mishraf Park, because the collection of ghaf trees that we have was preserved as a natural reserve. So that was the first park in Dubai. Al Khazan Water Tower and Park from 1983. I thought it's interesting to also highlight this because it's one of the few standing water tanks left in the city, and at the time it was an urban monument. Like, you would actually say where your house is because you're next to it. So it did shape that. These are just pictures I've taken of different neighborhoods of importance in Dubai, and they're neighborhoods that have a lot of modernism buildings and urban structures as well. My conclusion. So I always like to say that I think Dubai's architectural growth did not pause at the 1940s wind tower houses. It continues to survive in these modernist structures. A lot of people assume that that is our history, that's it, it's just these buildings. But no, our history didn't stop there. These buildings I'm talking about are 40 years, 50 years old. They are part of our story, so we need to preserve them. And sadly, a lot of them are being demolished and are at risk of being deteriorated because they're maintained very badly. I put an image here that was actually from the event from Al Amal Hospital, and it's written by a patient who said, "Don't fi amal fi mustashfa al amal." There's always hope in the Hope Hospital. And I thought it was very appropriate to this topic because I think hope is the only thing that keeps us documenting and wanting to preserve these buildings. There is, I think, what we're trying, or what the research is also trying to figure out is how is the local culture finding a balance through modern design? How is modernity expressed through this context? And I think a lot of my research made me conclude that it is not international modernism that was actually practiced here, but it was regional modernism. It was a style that wanted to belong to the international movement, yet was very sensitive to the context. And in its site awareness, in its site sensitivity, in its site specificity, it became very Dubaian in its design. Another thing I noticed is that there are eclectic tendencies. So you don't really see one uniform style or one uniform movement in these houses. And I think that is normal, considering that modernism was a new language and it was trying to find something harmonious with the existing local practices, with the existing vernacular materials. Another thing that was brought up also was that we noticed that there is this mass production of prototypes and typologies across the Emirates, not only in Dubai, but like a Jafar Tuqan school, you'd find the same one in Ajman and Sharjah. So there is this mass production of these buildings. And it's interesting to do that also for housing districts, etc., because it addresses the needs of a bigger population. What we're working also on, and I think everyone should be working on, is the classification and documentation of modern heritage in Dubai. This is very important because many of these buildings, again, are at risk, and if we don't save them, if we don't classify them, if we don't raise awareness to people about their importance, they will just be demolished to make way for more new city walk. And like, we don't need city walk, we have enough city walks in Dubai. Another thing that I always like to talk about is bridging generational gaps through these buildings. So these coral stone buildings and these beautiful things on the creek, which I love. I work in the historic district, my office is in one of those buildings. They're great, but my generation, I can't relate to it. I didn't experience this building, I didn't live in it, I didn't inhabit it. My parents, like my grandparents, would relate to it, but I don't. I appreciate it, but I don't. And then when you look at the new stuff that are happening, Dubai Mall, City Walk, Burj Khalifa, maybe my parents and grandparents can't relate to it, they wouldn't go to it. So there's this side, there's this complete new shiny glass kind of architecture, and you have this complete solid solid architecture from the past. But then you have this period in the middle, the 60s and 70s, and I feel this bridges the gap between the two generations, because these are the only buildings that I can truly say both generations experienced. Maybe our parents helped build these things. Maybe they had offices there. They went to the hospitals there. We went ice skating. We played in Sindbad. We did all of these things. So they don't only serve as buildings that just emerged at that time. I think they actually they link the generations together, and they help tell the story of Dubai, because it's very difficult to narrate the story of Dubai and say we came from the coral stone buildings to Burj Khalifa. No, that's not what happened. There was a huge movement in the middle that allowed for us to be who we are today. And another important thing is to narrate the story of Dubai through place-based memories. So whenever I sit with anyone who lived in those buildings, who went to those buildings, who built, who designed, it's so interesting to hear their memories of that place, because that is how you get to people, through their memories. That is how you can get to someone and tell them you really need to preserve the zoo because you went to it as a child. Don't you want your child to go to it? So this is a very important thing, and I think if any of you guys wants to share their own place-based memories about any of these buildings, I'd love to hear them. I will end with a picture that is Sheikh Rashid walking around, and that's an architectural drawing board, and I just like to end with this picture always because it just makes me feel like he likes us architects, so it just makes me feel good. Thank you.